morning, everybody. This is Tom Luongo. This is episode 36 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. I've got on tap Yra Harris today. We recorded this interview yesterday, and we did it through Zoom, which I'd never recorded on for the first time. And the audio is, on my end, is a little crazy. The Zoom's compressor was all over the place. So I did my best to clean my audio up as best as possible and not have it sound like I'm bullying Ira at every moment. So without further ado, let's get started with this week's show. Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. This is episode 36, and my name is Tom Luongo. It's June 2nd, 2020, and I've got with me today, we were talking about Europe back then, and we're going to talk about Europe today. His name is Yra Harris. Ira's a legendary trader, good friend of one of my mentors, Jim Sinclair, and publisher of his blog, Notes from Underground, which I absolutely recommend everybody read because Ira doesn't publish often, but when he does, it's well worth reading. So we're going to talk about Europe today, and I also want to talk about Hong Kong a little bit. So Ira, welcome to the show.
Well, it's good to be here, Tom. I appreciate it. And you know what? Jim Sinclair mentored me in many, many ways. I brought a lot to the table, but Jim was able to give it a maturation process. That, and along with my real mentor who taught me trading and taught Jim a lot about trading. So
right.
We share a lot of things.
Yeah, no, Jim taught me a lot. I read him religiously all through the 2000s and certainly up until about 2013 or so. And he's just a tremendous insight into the way the world works, and the one who turned me on to your work years ago as well. So this morning I want to talk about what's important to me is because I think it's pretty clear that Angela Merkel is now Queen of Europe again. The guys over at Duran have been covering this pretty well, and I've done it a little bit as well. And she's sitting in the driver's seat politically now, looking at polling rates of nearly 40%, which she hasn't seen in half a decade. And interestingly, she got that on the back of saying, well, there's not going to be any debt mutualization across Europe. Because the last time you and I spoke, you mentioned to me that you thought it would be potentially worth going long the euro because of Christine Lagarde at the ECB would be brought in for debt mutualization to stabilize the situation in Europe. And interestingly enough, Merkel and Macron just put forth this package, a $750 billion euro package, 500 billion of which would be grants issued through the European Commission. And to my mind, that's debt mutualization. So she says that on the one hand, gets the political capital, and then on the other hand, turns right around and betrays Germany. Give me your thoughts on what you think is going on here.
Okay. And I will take, the only one I'm going to take a back seat to in all this would be, of course, Bernard Connolly, right, who's a friend of mine who's really been on top of this for 25 years. Mm-hmm. But I remember our discussions, and here's a critical factor. I think Merkel has been a very flawed politician. In fact, Bernard had a phrase for her years ago called the plasticine chancellor, but she really couldn't make decisions. You know what? She applauded because really she didn't make any decisions. She kind of let events carry her. The one decision she made caused her a lot of hardship, and that was, of course, on the refugees. But we'll put that aside. And I think she was in real trouble here. But I think that through Lagarde, this helps turn it. And Lagarde, everything she's done should come as no surprise. And Christine Lagarde was very straightforward. If you bothered to listen to what she said, in fact, she wears an owl on her lapel, always a pin of an owl, to remind people, because she said at her first press conference, I'm not a hawk, I'm not a dove, I'm an owl. Mm-hmm. And that's fit really with what we had to talk about, because she wasn't making any of these hard and fast decisions based on some academic philosophy. Right. She knew what she had, and this was all, and Merkel's responsible for this situation because she was the pulling guard in front of Draghi, if I can use that metaphor, and gave him protection for him to build up the ECB balance sheet. And when I listen to all these people talk about Europe, nobody talks about the balance sheet and what the meaning of the balance sheet. I think that's what I think helps sway you when we go back to December, is that, hey, this is a massive balance sheet. And I personally asked this question to Jerome Powell, June 27, 2016. He was not the Fed chair at the time. He was merely a Fed governor speaking in Chicago, talking about, and it was the Monday after the Brexit election.
Right.
Europe, of course, was a big discussion. And I asked him, it was the last question of the symposium. And I asked him, I said, well, who guarantees the ECB balance sheet? And he didn't even blink. He said, we have a printing press, which I was kind of astounded by, because when I asked Carmen Reinhardt, who I have more respect for, the same question months later, she gave me a far more in-depth answer, and it wasn't quite that. And now we could see that Jerome Powell truly believes in the printing press as the modus operandi of last resort.
Right.
So that's where we are. So it's not a mistake about it. But that building up, that ECB balance sheet was all done on the back of Germany anyway. Because how else could this have been done? Do you think anybody would have really been buying Italian debt, Spanish debt, Portuguese debt, Greek debt, we can go on and on, French debt at those levels, if they didn't believe there was an implicit, and I stress that word, implicit guarantee by Germany that this would be supported?
Right. Exactly.
So she made this doable, and Lagarde knows it, and she's been left with this. And really, with the German High Court, the timing of that ruling was interesting, although I knew it was due. And what they had to say, of course, was interesting and actually fit everything I've been writing about for 6-7 years. So, and everything, so much of what I learned from Bernard in so many conversations, Bernard Connolly, and so many conversations we had. And I think at times, even Jim Sinclair, Jim was amazed at it, the in-depthness of it. So with all that, because what were you going to do with that balance sheet? That was all European sovereign debt, some corporate, of course, which they took some losses on. But at some point, the question was going to be called. And I know that the German High Court was worried about that. And the fact that it was Ottmar Issing, who was one of the most influential and historically significant people in Germany, wrote an FT op-ed maybe 3 years ago. He referred to it as taxation without representation.
Right.
Which was a call to arms and really gave more life to the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland Party.
Right.
So this has been an ongoing discussion, and Ottmar Issing's comments were really about who controls the fiscal authority of Germany. And that's really what the court was determining in that proportionality.
Right.
And now we've got a whole new twist, as you know, as I've written about, in fact, yesterday and previously, we've got a whole new twist to it now.
Right. So looking at it from this perspective, what do you see happening going forward? Do you see this package surviving the political process now, right? So Merkel's behind it. We have this implicit guarantee is already there, because the minute they start the process of effectively debt mutualization, they're going to do that through these grants, right?
Right.
And they're going to raise taxes to do it, and they now have that. Do you see that? Do you see everybody falling in line behind it? I certainly see Austria falling in behind Germany, because that's the whole point of the political process of getting rid of Sebastian Kurz, center right, the coalition partner that they used to have, the FPO or and that guy, and so because Kurz is a fake. So now the question is, everybody else. I have a patron of mine who's a international businessman, and we talk about this stuff all the time. And he's convinced that if anybody's going to leave the euro next, it's going to be Denmark, because they still have their own currency and they're not part of the system. And I find this whole thing interesting as to what's going to happen next, because I don't know that Merkel's going to be able to slam this through, or Merkel and or Lagarde are going to be able to slam this through. So give me your thoughts on that.
Okay. Lagarde is very clever. And I was not a big fan of hers at first to be appointed, and I did several with Rick Santelli.
Mm-hmm.
He said, wow, because then I saw the wisdom of why they had to choose her, because they needed somebody who was honestly, who had enough intestinal fortitude, backbone to do this. And she had lived through so many aspects of this, of which I was not a fan of whatsoever.
Right.
We've gone past the point of no return, which is that Germany can't pull out because it would decimate. And this is what people need to understand, and why journalists can't ask this question. It would decimate the global financial system, because if Germany pulled out, all this debt that resides on the books of European banks and other institutions, insurance companies, pension funds, global in nature, would take enormous losses because the prices of those debt instruments would decline dramatically.
Right.
So we're in too deep. We're in too deep. And can you imagine pulling the plug on it in this environment? And that's why when Lagarde, everybody likes to quote Rahm Emanuel's comment, I'm sure he didn't create it,
right.
That you never let a crisis go to waste. Well, she has to speed this up. And even now with what the German court did, if I was her, I'd be moving even faster, because I know what I can do under the existing law. And if it's going to become a battle between the European Court of Justice and the German High Court, that gets interesting.
Right.
Or say it's Germany's, well, it's actually Europe's Dred Scott decision, believe it or not. That's the way I'm looking at it.
Well, what I was going to say is that if you look at what Lagarde said, just to support that argument, she did tell Germany that, look, we'll go ahead with this QE without the Bundesbank.
Right.
I mean, she said that. So she's going to do exactly what she said she's going to do, and then throw it back to the European Court of Justice, who will of course side with her. And then force the Germans to deal with the problem. And now the bigger question I have is, how does Merkel survive that politically? And of course, she's taking over as head of the European Commission presidency on July 1st, right?
Yep.
So Germany will be in charge of that presumably to get all this done.
Well, as I saw last Sunday, not yesterday, but the previous week, and believe it or not, I was buying euros all Monday morning, which was Memorial Day holiday in the U.S., and the markets were thin. And because I saw a comment from Wolfgang Schweibel. Now, this is, again, if you don't know the players,
right,
you're at a great disadvantage. So Wolfgang Schweibel, who was the finance minister, Merkel's finance minister, and a very staunch conservative and hard money person, and then he left, and then he took on the role as president of the Bundestag.
Yes.
Now, as I wrote in last night's blog, what I'm trying to explain to people is that role, he is the second most powerful person in Germany, from what I understand.
Yes.
Because he controls what comes through. And he came out a week ago, 8 days ago, in support of Macron-Merkel, the 500 billion grants. And he said, I don't have the quote here, believe it or not, because that's so he said, as quoted in the FT article, if Europe wants to have any chance at all, it must show solidarity and prove it is capable to act. Germans have an overarching self-interest that Europe gets back on its feet. So this is
stunning.
Important. It is stunning. It's equivalent to the Powell pivot of January 2019, maybe greater.
Oh, because that's this Schäuble saying that is like Matteo Salvini saying we're all socialists now. Like, I mean, it would be like Trump saying I'm a member of Antifa. Like,
it is, because I'm going to tell you, I have a lot of respect for Schäuble. Some of his fiscal austerity I was opposed to because it was the wrong policy at the wrong time, but it shows you what he was about. And for him to make the statement, and then as Adam Tooze, because Adam Tooze was the only other person outside of myself picking up, because he cited the FT article too. He went farther and showed what Schweibel did to support the argument, which Schweibel said, look, if you do it the frugal four, which is what you led this off with, which is Denmark, Sweden, Austria, and the Netherlands, if you go that route and make it loans, that's like giving them stones, which is weighing them down. You know, I understood what he was doing with these or metaphors, whatever you want to choose. And yet, if you gave them grants, it was like giving them bread.
Yep.
I had to read that 3 times because it just blew me away. I go, this is Wolfgang Schäuble. I don't believe it.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
And you saw what the euro did last week. On Monday, it did nothing, which was to my chagrin because I thought, wow, this is really desirous. But it led me to also buy Canada because I said, you know what? Anything that weakens the dollar, which is what I think the Fed wants to do. The Fed can never say it, of course.
Right.
And the Treasury would like it too, although where Donald Trump comes off talking about a strong dollar, just, you know, that was 3 weeks ago. That I called him out on it. That just made zero sense.
Right.
But the fact that Schweible said this is, I mean, Lagarde, and give it to Lagarde. She's not crowing. She's not making a lot of noise. She's going about her business. Because no need to stick anybody's finger in the Germans' eyes here. Right. Schweible said is critical. And more importantly, it has to weigh now on the German High Court. Because when the president of the Bundestag makes this decision, it's putting fiscal authority back where it belongs, in the legislature. And that's what fiscal autonomy and national sovereignty is all about. So this, I've made this phenomenally important for the euro. And last week we saw the euro actually rallied about 2% against the dollar.
Right.
And more importantly, the euro did a lot of correction against the Swiss franc, which is an important cross, and against the yen. So the euro had a very outstanding week last week. And, you know, everybody's thought, well, it's because, you know, the U.S. equity market was up, risk is on. No. Risk may be on, but here Schweible had a hell of a lot to do with it.
All that's fascinating. And for the most part, and unfortunately, I hate to agree with it, but I can't argue with it. Because I fundamentally want to see the European Union fail, me personally. Because I think it's evil. I just say it's the EUFSR is the way I like to look at it. And because it truly is, right? It's, you know, they're just a bunch of commies, and that's that. But at the same time, Ira, what I'm going to say is, don't you think that there's going to have to be one more crisis in the euro in order to push German political, I'm not thinking political strategy here. And I'm thinking frankly, I'm thinking like a political bandle, which is that right now they don't have a crisis, right? There's still another crisis on the horizon. Right. That's why I kind of firmly believe there has to be at least one more uptrend in the dollar, or up wave in the dollar, which maybe not against the euro, but certainly it's happening against everybody else, right? You know, the yuan is falling, the emerging markets are getting killed, yada, yada, yada. And while the Fed wants to devalue the dollar, they can't when the world is so biblically short dollars. And I look at the stuff that's happening in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong money changers are literally out of dollars, right? I don't know if you saw that report over the weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, if I'm Merkel and I'm trying to betray the German people, what's the next thing you have to do? Which is that there has to be another euro crisis. So back in March, when everything spasmed, there was an unwind trade of, you know, Europeans had stuffed American markets, equity markets, and other markets full. And when the spasm happened, and everybody went into sell everything mode, we saw the euro in over a 2-week period spike from $1.09 to $1.15 down to $1.76, right? Over a 2-week period, right? If you look at the chart on the euro, and that was first a repatriation trade in my mind, which is that, you know, European banks who just needed euros because the system had seized up, right?
Needed dollars,
and then they needed dollars after that, right? So the euro rose and then the euro fell. Okay, well, aren't we I'm looking at the situation right now, and I don't think we're looking for a second wave. I think we're in the eye of the hurricane, right? We've already passed through one eye wall. We're in the eye, and now we're staring at the other eye wall of the next wave of capital destruction, next wave of deflation. And when that occurs, and any time now, in the next 3 weeks to 6 months, and we also have the whole situation with Brexit that coming up, right? That to me, these next 3 to 4 weeks are incredibly important because it could easily be we have another crisis form in the euro while the Brits try to hold firm and not go for an extension on Brexit. And that is, and then after that, and then if that sets the timetable for a Brexit at the end of the year, come hell or high water, either, there's a trade deal or there's no trade deal. So what do you think about any of that?
Well, I mean, there's so much there to
I know there's a lot to unpack.
I don't know that Europe needs another crisis. In fact, I think that Merkel's trying to do her best because if she goes out here,
mm-hmm.
And with Ursula von der Leyen, who's a German, and mm-hmm. she really stepped out in a very, because she was opposing the High Court. But I think Schweible, again, has bailed out a lot of these people. And I think Schweible is a very wise person going, well, if this was going to happen anyway, do we really need another crisis? Because right now they have to rein in the Frugal Four, of course, but those guys aren't going anywhere without Germany. Right. He says, well, don't get unanimity. Well, you know what? The worst thing for them would be if Germany sides with Italy, Spain, and everybody else, and those four are what we
up the twist.
The Hanseatic League, which takes us back way in history, mm-hmm. But they would be, to follow of Germany at this point would not suit them either. It wouldn't suit them. Germany is, they're the keystone of this.
Of course.
Good, bad, or indifferent. Yeah.
Right.
They're the guarantee. They're guaranteeing everybody. It's the German credit card. It's the German credit rating. Otherwise, well, the Dutch are the Dutch, and of course, they have a long history. The Austrians go through different periods. Maybe we'll wind up with a credit Gesellschaft.
Right.
We just don't know because the European banking system is in absolute disarray. All you do is have to look at European bank stock valuations to understand that. There is so much here. But I think Merkel, with having the EC presidency, and she was really wounded here. Don't believe a thing you read in the mainstream media, because they always need to find a darling, as they need to find and she was the darling, and she, I think, is responsible for a lot of problems in Germany. But I think Schweible just bailed her out big time, and now get rid of the crises and ride on the shoulders of what he just did for you, and that'll be Lagarde too. Because now is the time. You cannot wait. Now there's an ECB bank meeting this week. I don't think you'll see one iota of change. If there was any to be anything, they would announce more bond purchases.
Mm-hmm.
But with what the Germans just did, I think Lagarde now is breathing a sigh of relief and says, "Well, I don't have to do anything here. Let's just get what we have into." Motion and see how and this may in fact take care of the German High Court anyway, because again, now the Germans are back in control of their fiscal policy by what Schweible had said, and the fact that it was him who said it and his position. So I'm not looking for it right now, crisis. That's why I know we're the 200 week moving average. We closed on May 29th, which was month end, and we closed above the 200-day moving average in the euro currency, which was big. But now we're going to go for an assault on the 113.5, which is the 200-week, which it just because the market is short. Interesting. I just saw that the audacity of Goldman Sachs, who's been pushing that bullish dollar scenario for quite a while. They're bearish the dollar today but it all depends who's speaking. You have enough voices at Goldman Sachs, you'll find somebody who's bullish or somebody who's bearish. And
right.
You kind of do the CNBC switcheroo, and when the market's down, you bring out the bears, and when the market's up,
right. Right. I mean, whatever Goldman says, you do the opposite.
Well, it all depends who
right. It all depends on who's talking at Goldman.
That's that's just not Goldman. That's all Wall Street. They can always find somebody to speak to one line or the other. But first of all, I know, and I've been battling in my blog about the dollar, because I see, to me, if the dollar rallies, the Fed is an abject failure. Abject failure.
Yeah.
Because look, it took them a while to open the swap lines. Right. And I was 2 weeks ahead of them. I said, well, you got to open up the swap lines because this is a dollar issue. And it's not a trade issue. That's what people can't separate.
Right.
It's a finance issue. And this is the role of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Now, it's tough, and if Jim Sinclair was on this, I know what he'd be saying, but you have them as the world's reserve currency, and they are acting in such a fashion as to try to debase it, if not, depreciate it, because they know the importance of it. So now you have the guardians, if you will, the fiduciaries of the global currency telling you that they want to depreciate it. So right. I don't know if anybody is looking to buy it. And if you're buying it, what are you doing with it? What are you doing with the dollars? Are you putting it into U.S. dollar assets besides stocks, which, exist on the back of Powell's printing press, and, the fact that everybody else falls in line around the world? But as far as acting as any type of credible fiduciary, I'm hard pressed to look at the dollar. Now, yes, I know that there's 11 to 12 trillion in dollar borrowings by emerging market corporates. Forget about right. the sovereign debt.
Right.
And I'm using the International Institute Finance numbers as well as the BIS.
Right.
So the numbers aren't, I'm not making them up on the back of an envelope.
Right.
I'm using their numbers. And yes, so when the dollar does go higher, and actually, the emerging markets, the peso has put on a pretty nice performance, which I'm most bullish if Mexico can ever get their house in order with as far as corruption, but they're not the only ones. And then the ruble's turned hard here.
Yep.
We're back under 70 rubles to dollar. So there's been some, and even the Brazilian real, which was absolutely getting trashed, which helped destroy the American farmer's livelihood, by the way. But we've dropped from about 5.85 real to today 5.37. Mm-hmm. So we've had some comeback, which has been good, because the world debt situation, which is what the problem of the world is, vast
right.
debt, with the fact that it's denominated in dollars, acts as a deflationary drag on the world economies. And the Fed did that. The Fed spoke to it. Why Richard Clarida went quiet after all last year, before there was this type of problem, gave speech and paper for the whole second quarter of 2019. Well, he's been kind of missing in action here, but the Fed does have, as I say, a triple mandate. And that is, they're quick to remind you their inflation mandate. I'm going to discuss that. Their unemployment mandate, I'm not going to discuss that. But they do have a mandate to the world, and that's the dollar. So they flood the global system with dollars in order to ensure that there's enough dollars in the system.
Yep. And the question is going to be, if there's another, in my mind, there's another deflationary wave, whether there's going to be enough, whether they're going to be ready to do it again. And then at what point does the whole thing start to unravel as a confidence game, right? I mean, so so listening carefully here, the ECB and Europe have stabilized their situation, or at least the beginnings of it. So right. That's stabilizing the euro, but the dollar at the same time, the world is still biblically short dollars. The Fed is going to have to print until there's nothing. Until that fills. Now the question is, can they do so and still retain anybody's confidence? Because at this point, the bigger question is there enough capacity to print where everybody doesn't just look at the whole situation and go, are you kidding? Because look at what gold is doing against all of this. Right? Look at what Bitcoin is doing against all of this. There's other safe haven trades here that are happening. Silver is finally starting to break out. I think the ruble is responding to this weird rally in oil, which doesn't make any sense, which makes some sense to me. And that there's a huge gap on the oil chart when you look at Brent crude. Anything below, I think there's going to be a short-term rally up to about $45, and then I think the shorts are going to come in and push it right back down to where it belongs, which is down into the low 30s. But there's that gap. There's that gap from March that has to be filled.
Or maybe lower.
Yeah, absolutely, it's very possible. But the Russian ruble has been, and it's interesting you brought it up because I follow the ruble really carefully, and the Russian ruble has been decoupling from oil and the dollar for a long time now as the Russians de-dollarize their economy. And I'm going to try and shift this conversation, I think, now over to Asia a little bit, because I do want to talk about Hong Kong, because again, another one of these things where if they don't solve the problems that are coming to a head in Hong Kong, like they didn't solve the problems in Brussels, then does the world financial system, explode as well? Because the Hong Kong dollar peg, look, you and I both know that no peg can last forever. Right? The Hong Kong dollar peg is 37 years old.
Right.
And the Saudi Rial peg is however old it is, almost 50 years old. At some point, both of those are going to have to break, especially if there's a fundamental shift in the political structure of both countries. Now, the Saudis aren't part of this discussion for today. They're not germane, but Hong Kong is, because China is making sincere moves to change the political order in Hong Kong. So, with that said, if the Hong Kong dollar were to peg were to break, does that upset all of these other apple carts?
Oh, sure. The fractures will create severe damages because there's so much built around. There's derivatives built on derivatives around these things. These are not. They don't just exist. That's what people don't understand. So when they talk about, well, somebody's got a position here. Let's go back to March.
Right.
Why were the markets absolutely teetering absolute upheaval? It just wasn't the people who may have had risk parity trades on. Right. It wasn't the people who you think just had short vol plays on. It was all the people who tailcoat them, who put on massive leverage positions, thinking, well, these people really know what they're talking about. It's been the secret to how banks make their money. What do you think the basis of the whole prime broker business is? I get to look. I get to see that Tom Luongo is man, he's been hot, and he's built these massive positions up. Now I'm the bank trading. I'm going right with you.
Right.
I'm willing to give you free commission as long as I get a look. Right. That's an old floor trick. And it just builds on top. That's what the danger is. And honestly, the Fed doesn't comprehend that either, because they just look at big players, but it's all the ancillaries. It's everybody who's copied the risk parity of Ray Dalio and AQR, and it's everybody to go with it. And there are plenty, because there's algorithms that that deconstruct all these positions, and then they build with them, going, well, this is a great position. It's like, I tried to talk people out of being short vol. I said, this is like ludicrous. And they go, well, all we're doing is making money. And I can pointedly tell you, prior to the Swiss pulling the peg, here, we'll talk about pegs.
Sure.
And what happens when pegs? January 15th, 2015.
Exactly.
I had been on with Santelli the month before and a week before, warning something was coming, because I could read that chart, and the fact that the Swiss were putting forth so much money to hold and they couldn't get it off the floor at 120. Mm-hmm. I looked at that chart. You could put that chart up right now, the Euro Swiss, and watch how it looks like, somebody flatlining in the hospital. And I go, they're spending too much money. There's no way they can keep holding this peg. That was the same thing as the Brits back 1990, September of 1992.
Right.
What did they do, though? They kept raising interest rates. And it got to the point where, well, you keep raising interest rates, you can't sustain the peg. They didn't call it a peg. It was in essence a peg within.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was the band. It was the trading band.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Yeah, right. The
ERM.
The Deutsche Mark trading band, and Maggie Thatcher, ill-advisedly, and we knew that, joined at way too high a level, and the fact that they had to hold it there, and then when they couldn't, they were bringing their economy into absolute collapse.
Yep.
It was a matter of time.
So the Hong Kong Monetary Authority is going to be in the same position.
They've been much better stewards of this, so if you remember.
Yeah, they have.
They have been masters of this. Can they sustain that? I don't know. The politics there are very difficult. There's people who are jumping on way ahead of this, but I've been very fortunate when I was in graduate school to study China under one of the foremost authorities, Ed Friedman at the University of Wisconsin, who I learned a lot from. And this is far more convoluted than just, China instilling that basic law upon Hong Kong, deals that were made in, to get this done. And I know I've been reading everything that Chris Patton writes, but I take that with a spoonful of sugar because, he's got his whole life's reputation on that. But China is China. And to me, if you ask me honestly, Hong Kong's a sideshow. Taiwan will always be the issue. Taiwan was the issue when Nixon and Kissinger's silence about this, by the way, is really bothersome for me. A couple more, probably you may have seen Niall Ferguson, who I like, did an interview, I don't know, 6-7 months ago, maybe more, with Kissinger on Hong Kong when Hong Kong was really running hot. Mm-hmm. Not one question was asked about Taiwan. But the issue was when Nixon went to China in 71, 72, the issue always was the United States willing to risk thermonuclear war to save Taiwan?
It's a good question. I don't think so.
Well, neither did Nixon. Well, but the Chinese, as Mao would say, are paper tigers, because he knew.
Right.
He knew, and the world was nervous enough about China. People forget in 1957, the Chinese and the Soviets have the Great Schism because, Mao actually said to Khrushchev that a nuclear war was winnable.
Right.
And so, no, there's no way that the United States would risk thermonuclear war to save Taiwan. Right. I don't believe it. Nor, I'll make the same statement, do I believe that the U.S. would risk thermonuclear war to protect Turkey. So Article 5 of
NATO, no.
Right?
Exactly.
I wish that, with Trump's all his tweeting and
his bluff and bluster
about these things, never makes mention of it. But is NATO has it outlived its purpose? I would argue in many ways, yes, because I also happen to be one that the concept of Pax Americana has ended, and it's, sure. And even a guy who I think is the foremost political science voice in the country, Graham Allison, who was, of course, with the Thucydides trap, he said, anybody who thinks, and he's written in many articles, that we lived in a democratic liberal capitalist order, well, that was just a convenience in order to be able to contain the policy of containment of George. It's not that that's really what we pursued. Right. It was a convenience.
Right.
So, so is Pax Americana over? I would argue yes. Mm-hmm. What takes its place? I don't know, but we never know. The same with
I agree with you, Ira. We don't know, and the bigger problem that I have, and this is a sociological argument that gets into the fork turning and all of this other stuff.
Right.
That we have a generational imprint in our leadership that has not been fully turned over yet, and that's why things are hinky right now. That's why things are dangerous, right? We still have people who believe weirdly that we are that shining house on the hill, that we have the role to lead the world, and the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and everybody else are looking at us like going, guys, seriously, let's get down to brass tacks and let's talk Turkey.
Exactly.
And they're trying to be very pragmatic about it. And this is not to absolve China or anything. No, the CCP is terrible and they're horrible and all the rest of it.
Right.
And same thing with the mullahs in Iran. This is not. I'm not absolving any of these people. But at the end of the day, they are players at this table, and they know where their leverage points are. And Putin pushed Trump to the breaking point in Syria, and Erdogan as well in Turkey. And Xi is doing the same thing over Hong Kong and next Taiwan. And we know this. And Trump's instincts on this are very, very smart, which is that he's willing to bluff and bluster up until the moment when, okay, now we have to go to war. Oh, no, we're not going to war over this. You're out of your mind. We're going to figure something out. Yeah, I'm going to make it as painful for you as possible. Personally, what I think I see is happening in Hong Kong is that China's saying, look, I'm done with having intelligence services on our borders, known as banks, working for MI6 and the CIA, laundering money into all across Asia through these banks in order to fund insurrection campaigns against us. We're shutting that down. We're taking control of the situation. You can scorch dirt this as much as you want if you want on the way out the door. And Trump said over the weekend that he's going to do away with the special relationship we have with Hong Kong, and everybody's starting to freak out. And that just means that at some point, the world we've known with Hong Kong as a free city state is rapidly coming to an end. And when it's in China's best interest, they're going to break the peg. And I don't know what that's going to look like, but everybody's worried about China could dump their bonds, or they could do this, or they do that. I'm like, no, all they got to do is dump the peg on the Hong Kong dollar, and start another series of balls rolling downhill that no one can control. And they already know. And I'm thinking of just purely strategically here. I'm not thinking in terms of the money and all the rest of it, because I don't know these markets like you do. I just know strategy really well. And to me, it seems like China understands that the pressure they're putting on Hong Kong right now is going to break the peg. Now the question is, what does that look like afterwards? And because they wouldn't be making these moves if they didn't think that the benefits didn't outweigh the costs, which is that they want U.S. and British and others, but really primarily the U.S. and the Brits. They want them removed from, and the Federal Reserve setting monetary policy for Hong Kong on their shores, because that's what the peg does. That's what the peg does. The peg effectively sets the Federal Reserve in charge of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, because they're pegged. So whatever the Fed does, they have to ape.
Right. They have to. That's exactly right.
So
and it was a great tool for as long as they needed it.
Sure.
But look at as your points are very well taken, because don't forget, Putin always gets active when the world is in disarray.
Sure.
Or is distracted. Crimea,
Sure.
Sochi Olympics. Georgia and South
and South Ossetia, yeah. 2008.
2008 during the Beijing Olympics.
Financial crisis.
That too, but it was the week of the Olympics. Yeah, everybody, and they know Americans have the ability to focus for about 2 weeks and then it's over. So they go about their business. Well, that's what they've taught the world. They know, so they'll go about their business. And now you got China and India making noise. Now I say to people, I go, it's really no big thing, because China and India fought a border war in 1962. They did not. I said, really? You want to go look? People know
that border's been in dispute for 70 years. It's nothing new.
Yes, of course.
It only shows up to write headlines. And
look at the same with the Russian, Chinese border up in Xinjiang province.
Exactly.
Everybody wants to talk about the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs have no chance. It's like I explained that if you look at Xinjiang, it's the most mineral-rich area of China, the north region. Has been. Even Stalin had eyes on it, but figured better. But I said, look and I listen to people talk at me. I go, well, then why don't you go talk to the Sioux and ask them, what happened with all those treaties that were made about the Dakotas, and then when they found gold and all these other minerals, those, I'm not condoning it. It's just the world, and you better damn look at yourself. And the Chinese are really good, like the Russians. Now they're pointing their fingers. They love what's going on in the cities, because they point their fingers.
What's happening here in the United States is very dangerous, and there's a dangerous coup that's occurring right now, and I certainly hope that Trump understands that, because if he doesn't, then he's going to have failed the test of leadership, and we're going to be in serious trouble come to the rest of the summer, and which would also undermine the dollar, which might make everybody happy, right? because
Right.
political instability equals lower currency. It's just like that happens in emerging markets. That happens in frontier markets. And guess what? Got news for you. Happens in the center of the world as well. So, and
No,
that's
it's
the
true.
and that's the thing. So that's why I look at Hong Kong right now and I say to myself, this is a great fulcrum to press on the world and to impress upon the world at a moment and to let it go right when they can cause maximal damage. And the truth is that we've been in a war. World War III started years ago. It's a hybrid war. It's a proxy war, but it's been going on for 5 years now. I mean, at a minimum, certainly since Crimea. And it's just to look at it from, and you have to look at it from in those terms. And to me, Hong Kong's the next battle. The Italy was a battle, and then Matteo Salvini lost, and Merkel won that fight by keeping Conte in power. And it's amazing how these things all play themselves out. Again, once you know the players. And I don't know the players as well as you, but I know I know the German players well enough to know that Schäuble's statement is an immense shift.
Immense.
It's immense. It's the biggest news of the year, and no one's talking about it.
No, Adam Tooze.
Honestly, I didn't know anything about it until you told me, because I missed that little bond.
Adam Tooze, who is one of my favorite reads, because he really, Simon Johnson was the same in 2008. He understood the intricacies of how this all worked and was able to bring it to the fore, and was really majorly disgruntled that the elites in this country weren't discredited to a much greater fashion.
Right.
But you know what? I hold Obama accountable for that, and Tim Geithner, because I think Geithner protected him, and that was, and they went for Main Street. They went for Wall Street instead of Main Street. And you know what? For all those who really can't stomach Trump, that's responsible for Trump.
Oh yeah, no, it's all downstream of these things, and and Trump is, for all his faults, and he's got many, he understands, I think, the big dynamics here, which is that that Wall Street cannot be the only consideration, and I really do think that he has a handle on what to do next. It's that he's got the entire world. All of these people that we've talked about today, Lagarde, Merkel, this one, that one, all the other players that are behind them, they're all arrayed against it. The same way they're arrayed against Boris Johnson in the UK.
Yeah, right.
And Trump and Johnson exist as a node, as a counter node to frankly, the takeover of the world through the European Union. This is why the European Union needs to be destroyed, by the way, because they want to use the European Union as California for the rest of the world. You know how California is the worst. Every bad idea that comes out of California has to be propagated across the United States, because that's the way things work, because it's the most powerful economy. Well, if you can arrogate enough capital underneath the auspice of an unelected, undemocratic, literally Politburo in Brussels, well, got news for you. Anybody wants to do business with Europe, they got to do it by Europe's rules, and they can propagate those rules out to the world. And the hell with national sovereignty and the hell with national currencies and all the rest of it, because that's what's coming next. And that's what scares me. And when I watch these political fights, this is the way I'm seeing it. And it's fascinating to sit and talk with someone who understands the guts of the markets, the plumbing of the markets better than me. So
look at the most important person to listen to, and I can't stress this enough, is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is Donald Trump's Jiminy Cricket. And I don't mean he's his conscience. Right. I mean his brain. Listen to Bannon. And when, a lot of liberals celebrated, a lot of my good friends celebrated Bannon being, let go out of the administration, I said, it's a dark day. He's better off in the White House where he's accountable rather than where he traverses around and he gets access to a lot of places. And I listen when he talks, and you know what really woke me up to Bannon, because I really was not paying attention to him, but when he was handing out copies of The Fourth Turning as the most significant book, I said, okay, because somebody gave me a copy. I hadn't read it. I read it. I said, now I listened. Now I pay attention when he talks.
Yep.
Now I pay attention. And he is, to me, he is Trump's brain trust, and he's at arm's length, and that makes it worse, from an accountability standard.
Yep. No, it does. And I don't trust Bannon as far as I can throw him, and at all. Because once Navy intelligence, always Navy intelligence. But yeah, no, I know that and the whole shift towards the destruction of any relationship or any amicable split between us and China, I think is a very dangerous policy, and I think that all comes from Bannon. And
Bannon said a couple weeks ago, what's the election strategy? And he said China, China, China,
mm-hmm.
which I said, wow, you know what? That's pretty esoteric.
And Trump's been able to pull it off. If you look at the numbers, Ira, that Bloomberg poll from 2 weeks ago, that 78% of Americans are willing to pay more money to buy something made in not China than China. And 40% of Americans are willing to never buy another thing from China ever again. Right. Those are big numbers.
I understand. And that's as far as buying things, but where else does it go? So I think the rhetoric has been too harsh.
I agree.
And too loud. Tone it down. There's too many things going on in this world. You got a lot of, as I like to paraphrase Mao, there's a lot of piles of dry tinder around. And as he finished, it takes a single spark to start a prairie fire. So I'd be very careful, because you're going to unleash things that you cannot put back into the box. And you know what? For all these people, they'll go back to the 40s, to the 30s. Well, I'm going to tell you what. This much I can promise you. The Third World War, if it were to be fought between major belligerents, would not require a whole lot of manpower.
Nope.
Right? We know that. And it could be one and done. I hate to and be so flip, but this is a far more difficult situation. You've got Putin, who understands all the uncertainty, and interesting. See, this is where Trump himself pivoted today, because now he wants to expand the G7.
Yes.
Control of it. And Putin is, I'm bullish Russia.
I've been bullish Russia for years.
Russia gets really interesting because Putin wants those damn sanctions gone. Yep. Let's be honest.
Absolutely.
Sanctions, because he can work around some of those. But that last bit, when they sanctioned the Swiss companies, including the last 160 kilometers of Nord Stream, that stuck Putin in the eye, and he was none too happy about it, because Nord Stream is his final great project.
Yep.
Because it allows him to really gain control of Europe energy.
Well, it allows him to have a very substantive, going forward, very substantive relationship with the Germans, which is unbreakable, because pipelines are not to be trifled with. They're permanent. And making Germany the hub of European gas transit is Germany's always been the fulcrum. And it's Merkel in the middle. I've been saying it for years. And so Nord Stream 2, and I understand why Trump is against Nord Stream 2, but he can't stop it. No matter what he does, he can't stop it at this point. It's going to happen. It's going to finish.
Right. You can't stop it.
No, and delaying it for 18 months, what does that do? You overthrew Ukraine. You threw them to the German wolves as well. I mean, the gas transit deal that Putin signed in December at the last minute, that was the worst deal imaginable for Ukraine. The Poles are going to wind up having to buy. We're going to wind up buying Russian gas again. You just wait when we get to this winter, and the Poles can't import enough U.S. LNG, and the Russians will still be able to sell them LNG cheaper because Yamal is literally right around the corner. It's all dumb, and it's all just idiotic. And I think Trump may be finally realizing that he has to bring Russia in from the cold, and by trying to play Putin off of Merkel. Not that I think that will work, by the way.
No, it's not. It's first of all, because you haven't mentioned the key factor, which is Gerhard Schroeder.
Yep.
We can't escape Gerhard Schroeder and the fact that he runs the pipeline venture Gazprom.
Right.
I mean, come on, guys.
Exactly. Really? Exactly. No, you're fine. I'm sorry, I forgot that. You're absolutely right. Correct.
And you know what? And I always remember and Dennis Gartman, who I am a fan of, Dennis and I go way back, but Dennis wrote in 2005 or 6 maybe earlier, when Don Evans was the Commerce Secretary under George W. Bush, was leaving, and the Russians had approached him, and he declined it. But Dennis had written, that Don Evans had considered it. Well, see, in America, we were be very upset about it. You have the guy who had just left the chancellorship, who right into Gazprom, right into it. And the scary thing was, he left by him calling an election he didn't have to call, that he knew he was going to lose. I mean, come on, let's wake up, please.
That's just beautiful. It's like, part of me, I know it's terrible and it's awful and everything else, but you gotta love the chutzpah.
with a straight face, they look at you. That's almost as good as Davos anointing Xi as as the world's free trader. 2000.
Right.
Come on.
Exactly. It's silly. All right, Ira, this has been an absolute blast. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I love talking to you, man. But I think
we'll do it again.
Absolutely, it was fun, and I'll call you the next time something big happens in Europe. I'll give you a ring.
I
love listening to what you talk, and I'm going to remind everybody that, Ira, I think you still have copies of Bernard Connolly's The Rotten Heart.
Oh yes, thank you, thank you.
If you have not, if you've not read this book, you have to read it. I will put a link in the description of the podcast for that, both that and Ira's blog. You can email Ira directly to get a copy of it. You have to read it if you want to understand the European Union and how it came into being and how it exists today.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ira. Thank you for yours.
Okay.
Be well.
All right. Bye.